is getting wider, and it's accelerating. So how do we, great, let's talk about all this whizzing new tech and all the potential and opportunities that it has, but how do we ensure as well that it's really benefiting those local indigenous communities that we heard a lot about in the last week? So I'm really pleased to be joined by an excellent panel of speakers to navigate this topic. To my right, Nick Michael Phillips, Director of Seabed 2030. Jason Giffen, Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer at the Port of San Diego. Aspasia, to his right, Aspasia Pastra, Assistant Professor, Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute at the World Maritime University. And Julie Angus, Chief Executive and Co-Founder of Open Ocean Robotics. So why don't we start, just for those who don't know your organizations, I want you to say one sentence, I don't need the full history, but one sentence around what your organization does, and then what ocean tech or tech are you, more generally, that you think can have the biggest impact in ocean sort of conservation, are you most excited about? Jamie, can you start us?
Great, thank you. Well, it's good to be here, and thank you very much to the Commons team for making all this happen, and great to see so many people in the room. I'm the director of the Nippon Foundation JEDCO Seabed 2030 project, in its 8th year now, with a mission to inspire mapping of the entire ocean floor and to make that depth information freely available for everybody who needs it, from senior decision makers down to local communities. So that's my first sentence.
Perfect.
The tech that is really accelerating ocean mapping, and we've seen it within the last 10 years, is uncrewed technology. And that has been a game changer. Vessels that are now able to operate autonomously or semi-autonomously across the ocean, being able to not just map the ocean, but gather other ocean parameters, smaller payloads, smaller vessels, greener technology, and the operators, where needed, sitting in the safety of a shoreside operations room without having to deal with the impacts of operating in the ocean.
Interesting. We'll come back to that. Jason, over to you. And we don't necessarily think of, I didn't, maybe others do, I don't necessarily think of ports when I think of technological innovation, but actually ports can be spaces where there is quite a lot of innovation happening. Can you talk a little bit about your role at Port of San Diego and the tech that you're most excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the Port of San Diego, we're really leaning in. We're a multi-use, multi-activity port in the southwest of Southern California, just a short drive north of the Mexican border. We are a traditional port in many respects that has supported established industries. But about 10 years ago, we decided to really lean into what we could do to support the blue economy. And from that standpoint, we essentially opened up a open-ended procurement process to start looking at how we could support emerging businesses and startups, which have a wide variety of solutions, from coastal resiliency to aquaculture to data systems. And we haven't put any parameters, so I have to tell you what's most exciting to me is not a bilateral solution, but really embracing the most powerful engineer on the planet, Mother Nature, and looking at opportunities where we can take ecological integrated approaches to our technology, which are multifaceted with multiple benefits. And the thing about ports is we're part of a global network. We're a regional economic engine in San Diego, but we're connected to a global network. And when you look at some of the panels we've had already, we're looking at what we can do to go from plans to pilots to scalable actions that can then be deployed elsewhere around the globe.
Excellent, thank you, Jason. So we'll come back to that. Espacia, can you give us, you're the academic, give us a sense on the panel. Can you give us a sense from the vantage point of the university, some of the exciting developments you see?
Okay, I work at the World Maritime University, which is in Sweden. It was established 42 years ago from the International Maritime Organization, which is the regulatory body of the world shipping industry, or the environmental regulations, construction regulations come from the IMO. So we operate also under the United Nations framework, IMO mothership. And in 2018, we established the Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute, and we are the ocean focal point that we work on the interface between science, industry, policy, ocean governance. And because without this interface, we cannot talk about the oceans. We need this collaboration and this interface in the research. So this is the first point that you asked us about the background. The second point, which about the technologies, the future that interests us, for me it's the unmanned also. Technologies, the underwater technologies, the unmanned technologies, and we have a large-scale project at the Global Ocean Institute, which is funded by the Nippon Foundation, and it's called the Future of the Ocean program. And there is, we deal with these technologies and a blueprint that we have to create for these technologies in order to enable their mass utilization. So on this program, we will do various future scenarios, how the ocean governance framework will be 50 years after that. So we will see where are the regulations, what is the regime interaction, all the international, regional regime without, and what are the gaps, how we have to overcome the obstacles, what is the role that all these non-state actors will play, and how these technologies, we will have a blueprint for these technologies to enable their mass utilization.
Yeah.
And I will come back to this.
Excellent, thank you. And Julie, open ocean robotics.
Yes, so we produce the uncrewed surface vehicles that collect much of this data. So we produce solar-powered uncrewed surface vehicles that can go from near shore to offshore, collecting a range of data from bathymetry data to marine mammal monitoring to monitoring NPAs for illegal fishing and biodiversity. So we're really excited to contribute to better understanding our oceans in a safe, sustainable way. For me, one of the things that I'm most excited about is the increased adoption of technology like this, because that's what we really need. We have great tech, but we need to put it out in the ocean. We need ports and customers to trial it. We need, regulators to approve it, and we need to ensure that the public views it as safe, because this can be incredibly transformative technology.
Why is, from the safety point, why would the public be concerned?
Well, whenever you're bringing in a new technology, there's concerns. There's nobody navigating it. How can I ensure it's not going to run into something?
Right.
How can we ensure that the data is just as good as the data that we collect using ships and other traditional ways? So you have to demonstrate it, and we need partners. We all need to work together, and that's why this panel is so fascinating, because you're bringing these different facets together.
Yeah. So from the, come back to you, Jamie, from the technological point of view, maybe let's just focus there first, right? Has there been quite a sort of revolution, of real advancements made in recent years? Sort of where are we from a technological standpoint? Are we pretty much there in terms of unmanned vehicles, or are we likely to see continued further developments there in a more way?
Well, I think that within the last 10 years, that there has been a significant increase, and Julie's more of an expert than I am, but we are seeing organisations, companies delivering more and more of that uncrewed technology, and it's ramping up. We're seeing governments investing in that uncrewed technology, a lot of it for national security reasons, but also for research, for gathering those ocean parameters. And the big change has been setting the regulatory framework to be able to operate those uncrewed vessels at sea safely to meet the requirements of the International Maritime Organization and national flag state and port state requirements. So that has been the game changer, and we're seeing the ramping up of those vessels, everything from hydrogen power, traditional diesel power, sail power,
Right. Sorry, and you said the regulatory framework has been put in place?
Well,
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, any vessel that operates at sea has to meet regulatory requirements, which are set by the flag state under international treaty with International Maritime Organization. I'm not an expert by any means, but I do know that they exist. And to be able to operate at sea, vessels over a certain size, you must meet those flag state requirements. And of course, traditionally, the maritime industry is quite a traditional organisation globally. We've had crewed vessels at sea, whether it's a yacht, whether it's a cargo carrier, whether it's a container ship. So that change, that step change to going from crewed vessels where you've got crews manning the bridge to actually somebody sitting in an offshore shore with all the same sensors has been a significant change within that industry. And it's making sure that those operators operate within the safety at sea, collisions at sea, for maritime pollution.
I can comment on that as well because we've gone through the regulatory process. So we're based in Canada, we're approved by Transport Canada to operate in Canadian waters. And that in itself was quite a process, obtaining those approvals, because the regulatory system is designed to work with ships that have people on it. And this is still very new. And as a result, there is no global regulation yet from the IMO. It's something that's being worked on, but it means it's very fragmented. So the rules to operate an uncrewed surface vehicle in Canada are different from the US, are different from France. So until we have a unified policy, it will really hinder growth. And a unified policy that is in line with what we want these vehicles to do. So for example, now some of the policy is really not adequately structured. So for example, policymakers don't understand fully that a vehicle without people on it doesn't have the same safety concerns than a vehicle than a boat. So you don't necessarily need equipment for saving people on the vessel. And when you go out farther away from shore with an uncrewed vehicle such as ours, if you're 100 nautical miles out, the risk is actually much lower than if you're in coastal waters, because there's very little traffic out there. So part of it, I think, is an educational process and the countries coming together under the guidance of the IMO.
Maybe that's the policy and the legal framework. In the under Future of the Ocean program, we try to identify the challenges we have with these autonomous underwater vehicles, like leaders. What's the problem? And we went to the stakeholders, the industry, and to professional tasks, take them out, although maybe from salinity, maybe for security reasons, maybe. So we don't have a clear framework about when these devices are floating, what will happen. The second point is the marine scientific research, because in the regime we have, you have to ask the coastal state for permission if you want to do marine scientific research with this instrument, with this platform. And we saw in all the interviews we did that different countries have different regimes for permission. In some countries, it's too time consuming to take permission in the exclusive economic zone of the country to conduct scientific research, essential ocean variables. So what we need there also is simplified procedure, access. And then there is amazing data that is collected for security reasons by ministries or security organizations, but it's not released to the. But then there is a point that we can talk about declassification of some basic data that collects technology. And there are much more legal challenges, such as marine protected areas. These technologies cannot easily conduct research there because they're protected areas. We don't have clear guidelines. But if you cannot operate these technologies there, if you cannot see what's the problem, how you will measure it, you need these technologies. But again, it's a gray area that we have to clarify.
I see. No, it's really interesting. I hadn't thought of all those sort of legal challenges involved, really, and it sort of brought to mind as well, obviously the innovations around sort of satellite and the benefits that provide, but also the just sheer number of satellites that are now in orbit and the potential for some pollution there. You can almost imagine something similar happening with the ocean, right? There's the benefit of all these new devices gathering data, but if it's just proliferation and there's just floating around.
This recent PPNJ agreement is a significant milestone because according to the agreement, it is ratified, we reach the magic number of 60, it talks about the sharing of all these benefits. All the countries have to share all this data. There should be a fund, ever. So it's a very good mechanism to solve some of these issues.
Yeah. Jason?
Maybe just briefly an observation from a kind of practitioner standpoint. What we're seeing is a really significant acceleration in the type of technology that we're using at ports around the world. So something that we typically would have done would have been to do fish surveys or hyperspectral mapping to identify marine debris, or maybe we sent divers in. Since then, at the Port of San Diego, when I say Kendra in the second row, we partnered with 2 Canadian companies to collect stationary data from buoys. One is a San Diego-based company, another is out of Canada, and we're looking at collecting information below the surface of the water, chemistry information, water chemistry as an example, and then above the surface of the water, we're looking to collect wind, wave, and wake information. Then when you introduce unmanned vessels on top of that, we're now able to go in and collect data across transects to see not just things from a security and a marine domain awareness standpoint, but we're able to get close to understand what makes San Diego Bay, in our case, thrive, which is a vibrant ecosystem that has an abundance of wildlife that's getting better every year. And it's allowing us to collect data on a more ongoing basis, and we're able to do that because most ports are in very urban locations. So tampering with technologies, that's a problem. But if the technology is moving at a speed that's difficult to be subject to tampering, it provides another opportunity for us to collect both stationary data from buoys, but also transects from vessels.
When you mentioned, Jason, so I didn't expect, it's good that we covered some of the regulatory challenges quite quickly, but I do want to sort of come back to some of the technological innovations. You mentioned nature-based developments. Can you give maybe some example around some of the interesting technologies we're seeing there and the potential use cases for them?
Yes, absolutely. So when we start looking at some nature-based solutions, 2 of which come to mind throughout what we think is a pretty innovative program, which is our Blue Economy Incubator that focuses on pilot project facilitation. One is an example we partnered with a company which many of you may know called Concrete, and the idea is to take traditional single-use riprap, which is intended essentially to protect the shoreline and the assets, but to integrate tide pools that actually invite in the marine life to take up residence right along the shoreline. And when we compared that solution, these interlocking tide pools, to riprap, or the rock formation along the shoreline, of which we have about 70% of our 34 miles is armed. If we can provide ecological uplift through solutions like that and others, that is increasing species diversity and abundance. Literally in these pilots that we have 40 to 50 additional species living along the shoreline, most of which are virtually endemic to San Diego Bay. If we can do that in small segments, imagine if we could replicate that along all armored shorelines at ports and harbors around the globe. It's a way to add value in terms of uplifting the shoreline and adding ecological benefit that provides biodiversity, which is a little bit of a focus of today's discussion, as well as improved water quality. And then other examples we're looking at are related to supporting shellfish and seaweed aquaculture, whether it's for consumptive purposes or, more importantly, we're located in Southern California, just north of the Mexican border, and so we've got opportunities to look at the potential of seaweed aquaculture from a bioremediation standpoint. It's literally taking contaminants and metals and other things up through a farming process. And so we're in the early stages of seeing from a planning standpoint what that could look like. We haven't deployed those compared to the coastal lock system. And the final point I'll mention is we're also looking at the opportunity that we can grow culinary seaweed in California. We had a test pilot in San Diego Bay. So there are a couple examples of things that we're leaning into.
And how are you, I'm assuming you're not doing this alone, right? You have partners, there are universities. Just want to kind of look at sort of the collaboration required in it, in particular the role of universities in getting technological innovations from labs to the real world. Can you say a little bit about who do you partner with to explore some of these innovations?
Absolutely. So locally, San Diego has a wealth of universities that we partner with, some of which are in the room. Our friends at University of California, San Diego, Scripps Institution of Oceanography, University of San Diego, but we also have a very expansive network of universities. Sometimes we're dealing with very, very specific issues, maybe related to environmental remediation or specific threatened or endangered species. And we have partnerships with more than a baker's dozen of universities across the country for which we take advantage and partner to get the expertise, whether it's related to shellfish work that we might be doing with University of North Carolina to some of our local partners.
And what do they get out of that value exchange?
Well, they get-
A place to test their ideas? Is that-
Yeah, absolutely. And the big thing that we do is we provide access. So I think the reason that this room has been so packed and so many other venues have been packed is because everybody around the globe has ownership and is a stakeholder in the oceans. The Port of San Diego was set up by the state of California, and we manage public lands on behalf of the people of California. And what we are essentially both a landlord and an operator and a regulator for is to provide controlled access to make sure that we're balancing economic development with at the same time supporting academic institutions to have access to do research. And it's not just the PhDs. We have programs where we partner with graduate students who actually work at the Port of San Diego through the Sea Grant program, for example, California Sea Grant. We sponsored them for several years now. Gives you an idea of the continuum.
Yeah, excellent. And Jamie, what about seabed? Like, who do you partner with? Who are the key people there?
Wow. Pretty much across all sectors. So we have upwards of 80 MOUs with partners ranging from government to research institutes, industry, and in some cases sort of citizen science organisations. So, and some of them are in the room here. We've got sail drone manufacturing, autonomous surface vessels. We've got seakeepers at the back. I think somebody mentioned Scripps. I think if they're here, we partner with Scripps. And I'm just looking at the UK Hydrographic Office, one of the government institutes, NOAA. And that names but a few. If anybody's in the room who partners with Seabed 2030, I've missed you out, my apologies. Every partnership is hugely important to us because going back to what I said right at the start, Seabed 2030 is there to inspire ocean mapping.
Yeah.
So what we do is encourage others to do it. And why? Because actually the cost of, I'll wind back slightly. To date, we have mapped 26.1% of our ocean floor.
Right.
Now, that means 3/4 of the ocean is unmapped, yet we're operating on it, which is crazy if you think about it. You wouldn't drive, I've got some colleagues here who are driving from Nice to Stockholm over this next week. You wouldn't make that journey without an adequate map. Yeah, we operate on the ocean.
Right.
So, we're there to inspire. The cost of mapping the ocean, that remaining 3/4, ranges from $3 to $5 billion US dollars. Now, that's a lot of money to the average citizen, but when you talk about government investment, it's not a lot. When you look at some of the investment government makes in areas like the PPE that we had to use during COVID or other areas, $3 to $5 billion is not a lot.
Yeah.
But it's not affordable within the Nippon Foundation GEBCO construct. So we're inspiring others to do the ocean mapping. We then assemble that bathymetry, that depth information, and we release it in a product called the GEBCO map or the GEBCO grid.
Yep.
GEBCO is an age-old program that is run by the International Hydrographic Organization and the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. It's a product. It is also a term for the collaboration of people within that. And we make that available. And that then gives a level playing field to organisations who want to access relatively small-scale ocean mapping data, not particularly high resolution, but adequate for research, adequate for reconnaissance purposes, and allows people to go and look in more detail at certain areas of the ocean. And that is available to anybody who wants it, free to use, free to download, so a level playing field. But we can't do it without innovation, and we can't do it without partnerships, and that's why we are absolutely hugely reliant on our partners to help map the ocean, and that can be those that are actually going out there and doing it, and it might be part of, freeing up that depth information as part of a wider client job. It might be governments, it might be industry who have bathymetry sitting in the archives that was used for some client work, laying cables and pipelines, whatever, but has not made it out of that organisation, so freeing that up. And in the 8 years that Seabed 2030 has been in existence, when we started, the world ocean map was at 6%, ocean floor map, we're now at 26%. So that's a huge amount, and 1% of the ocean mapped equates to about 3.6 million square kilometres. So we're talking about huge ocean spaces. So driving that forward to 26.1% has been a huge effort, but we've got to get to the 100% because we really do have to have that framework upon which we're going to base all other sustainable development of the ocean, looking at the way ocean currents circulate, the effect they have in climate change, all depends on the shape and the roughness of the seabed, and we're not there yet, but we're driving forward.
So we heard a little bit of the announcement of the EU Ocean Pact, and there were some other panelists earlier talking about the creation of a digital twin of the ocean. How is that? Is that work pretty much totally consistent with what you're doing? Or is
it is. I mean, having that three-dimensional reference framework, as we try to do on land, and we have done on land, we've done it for the surface of the moon, we're not quite there with the ocean, is critical. And actually, the digital twin needs that three-dimensional reference frame.
Julian, when I come to you on the question I posed before, also all around that sort of gap between technology, innovation, and local communities. Maybe talk a little bit about how the technologies that you're working with, what are the sort of benefits that could come from those in terms of ocean conservation, and how do you require, you talked a little bit about deployment, maybe talk a little bit more about how do you get these technologies out and the benefit that they can have to local communities.
Sure, absolutely. Maybe I can give a couple use cases, projects that we've been involved in. So we worked with an academic institution in the US, Stony Brook University, and they are monitoring a region called Shinnecock Bay for biodiversity, and they do eDNA sampling there using a boat. So that's quite labor intensive, and you can't go in all the regions because it's very shallow. But eDNA sampling is a powerful way to measure biodiversity because it allows you to just take a sample of water, and from that you can measure all the DNA that has been shed from those animals. So you know more accurately, and you know less invasively because you're not dredging anything, the animals that have gone through that. So we created the first integration between a surface vehicle that has the ability to deploy for endurance missions and self-right and is solar powered for that, and an eDNA sampling system. And they were able to deploy it for 3 weeks in this very shallow bay and understand parts of the bay that they have never before been monitored, and also to voyage in waters that were owned by indigenous communities because of the collaborative process, and then that information was shared more broadly. So that's an example of how technology advancements, both the platform like ours, but also the sensor technology, can lead to a better understanding of our environment.
And I suppose, do you do work, I know you do some work on kind of ocean literacy as well. Sort of, what, maybe can you say a little bit about your work there? Is it tied to helping also understand what some of the new technologies that are available in ocean conservation?
Certainly, ocean literacy is the core for the oceans, and it's time that we motivate the young generation. But as before, in Japan, in the World Ocean Initiative, the kids, now, start from the primary level, they know what are life, but they don't know marine life, they don't know prochlorophore. This is a tiny bacteria that produces 10% of the oxygen in the air. And, there are amazing things happening down there, and you don't know them. So what the ocean literacy from the primary school is of utmost importance. And then it's ocean literacy to the society, the community, and we have to educate and train them to understand the benefits and the economic potential that the ocean has. So everything comes again to radical collaboration. There's a of radical collaboration, and it's not a bad term. If we can conceptualize where we need radical collaboration, I will say that it's the three pillars. I call it the reef pillar. When it comes to these technologies, it's regulation, it's integrated observation system, data, and the third is the finance. So when it comes to regulation, we have to include all the communities, the local people there, in the frameworks that we will develop. And the corporation, the industry, the policy makers, and the communities there enabled to overcome all these challenges we have in regulation.
So just on that, do you see like good examples of that happening in certain places?
Yes, certainly. In many
Yeah.
regional agreements, for
Really?
example, you have all around the world, the coastal communities have a key role to play. And this is something that, for me, as we talk with the eDNA, it's a very useful technique that can work with coastal communities. They can collect eDNA and then you involve them in all this process. And they feel that they have a sense of belonging in this process. Not, they don't have something like we call it parachute science, the Western world comes just research. They are also involved in the process, collect the DNA, they collect samples, and they educate them properly for quality signal in science research. How you should do it, so we provide proper education capacity building. This is what we also in the university have to show under the framework. We do a lot of capacity building to train communities about the future of the ocean. So, regulation is the one pillar that we need, radical collaboration. Then it's, we need all this data that comes from these technologies, especially when it comes from the marine biodiversity, to be integrated in a common system. Because when we collect data about the weather, when we collect, for example, data about the salinity, the heat, this essential of variables, it's easy. Now, since after the Second World War, we have specific procedures with these technologies to collect this data. But when it comes to the marine biodiversity, so when we talk about phytoplankton, so plankton, whales, polar bears, then these biological variables, it's very difficult to collect them. And each one researcher collects with different way. Okay. So for example, when we did this interview for the Future of the Ocean program, the expert told us that, for example, we gathered together and we took all the data for a polar reef. We wanted to do an assessment there. And we took all the data that existed for 40 years from different researchers to see what is the situation with the polar reef from 1997 to 2012. We collected data, all the data that has passed over the year. And it made no sense. It was like comparing apples with oranges. Because every researcher, every marine biologist collect data in a different way, store it in a different format, there's no harmonization. We need again collaboration about data. And in the Global Ocean Institute, we just 2 months ago created a working group from marine biologists, from industry makers, these technologists, and intergovernmental organizations, and organizations like GOOS to work together to create the curriculum for higher education, to train all these ocean data leaders where they should, how they should have the data, where they should store it, and how they should handle it. So it's about a regional and global data system that we need.
And who at the global level should be the sort of owner of that common system? Is it the IHO?
First of all, we have Goose, who are making a fantastic job in coordinating with Goose. The Goose make a fantastic work in collecting essential ocean variables. But for example, about heat, salinity, or the work meteorological organization, we do a fantastic work with collecting data. But when it comes to marine biodiversity, all these elements that I told, the picture is totally fragmented. So there is where to take the lead.
Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of that sort of governance, data governance framework? And particularly, I think, on this point about the data around marine biodiversity.
This is the problem.
I mean, from my perspective, my focus is really on depth information. There is a regulatory framework for depth information gathered for the sake of navigation, and that's very important, as you might imagine. Less so for seabed mapping, ocean mapping for research and other uses. But actually, the world is slowly getting together and starting to standardise that. One of the challenges we have as an organisation is when we get old data sets, it goes back to the spaces, and it can be in a different format, gathered in a different way, and we've got to sort of fight our way through that to try and extract the right information to put on a map. That's a challenge. We've got teams around the world that can overcome that. The use of machine learning, AI is helping us there. So innovation again is key. But standardisation is an issue within wider ocean mapping outside that safety navigation.
And are you seeing any of you mentioned AI, some of the, and we talked a little bit about universities, but what about some of the big kind of tech firms, AI firms? Are they getting engaged in supporting and partnering on issues around ocean data and ocean technology, or does it tend to be sort of separate, more within the ocean sector?
I mean, certainly on the mapping side, and that's all I can speak to, they are starting to take an interest.
Yeah.
Not quite there yet, because quite often, and this goes back to who actually owns the depth information, how is it gathered, how is it licensed for use, and those are some challenges that we're working hard to overcome, and they are significant challenges because, and I've said this in other fora, we've mapped 26.1% of the ocean, but I'm convinced there is only 20% of the ocean that has already been mapped, but that depth information has yet to be shared. Some of it may never see the light of day, it may have been gathered for defence, national security reasons, but there's a significant portion that is tied up in industry and research archives, and it is working through the methodology to facilitate its release. We have within the IOC and within the decade, there is a decade corporate data group that is working very hard to overcome some of the industry barriers to releasing data, and we are trying as a Seabed 2030 organisation to spread the word to ensure and to work with partners, research partners, Plymouth Marine University, Plymouth Marine Laboratory, one of them here, to look at encouraging researchers to free up that information. Once the research papers have been written, once the embargoes have been lifted, to not let it fester in an archive somewhere, to actually free it up so it can be put to wider use. And of course, making sure that we're working with local communities so that they benefit. And again, it goes back to that parachute, sides that parachute. We don't want to see that. We want to work with local communities so they benefit from the data in wider, for wider work within that regional community or within that country.
Please, go ahead.
I was maybe just going to comment on the role of AI in ocean tech companies, because it definitely is playing a powerful role. Within our company, we have a couple AI products that run on our vehicle, and that's really important because when you put a vessel out into the ocean, it's got very limited communication. You're largely dependent on satellite. So if you can understand what you're seeing or what you're hearing and then send back those analytics instead of that raw data, that is very meaningful. Also, right now, we're leading a $3.7 million project funded largely by the Ocean Supercluster in Canada that's bringing together a syndicate of 5 companies, including companies that are building sensors for underwater vehicles, companies that are building aerial drones, and companies that build other sensors. And by taking data from these different platforms and fusing it together and using AI to derive those analytics and insights from it, you can get so much more from that data. You can see farther, you can see more accurately, you can understand the ocean better, you can make better predictions. So I think we're just really at the cusp of what we can accomplish using AI in the ocean.
Yes, may I add something, because we talk about ocean technologies, and sometimes people think that there is only one market, the ocean technology market, but it's 4 markets. Because first of all, it's the technologies and the sensors as products themselves. Okay, and I think this is very clear. And then we have a second market, which is the deployment of these technologies, the people deal with the launching, maintaining, providing service to the technologies. And then we have another market, which is the data management market. How this data from these technologies is stored, all these cloud companies that will take more and more role of this. And there is the 4th market, which is the information market. All this data that has come and become information and decision making. So if we properly train the society and the people who are dealing with technologies and the investors, this is the most important, how to bring the investors and private companies to talk before in this, we have to be very clear with the markets and through private-public partnerships to make very targeted investment in one of these sectors.
Yeah.
And these sectors will generate many sub-sectors, probably other.
And are those, which of those 4, what would you say is sort of most developed at this point?
The technologies themselves, I think that sensors, I think there are amazing companies with the state of the art. But the less developed is the information, the 4th one. We have so much data, but we don't know what to do with this data. And so what will be data engineers who will convert this data to products for the politicians and decision makers. This is where artificial intelligence will play a huge role to convert this into products.
I just might add one thing. So I completely agree in terms of the technology especially from the hardware side. We're hearing a lot about collecting data and monitoring information. So we're beginning to do some of that at the Port of San Diego to track and help us identify invasive species, as an example, algae that is in a very small portion of San Diego Bay. But the challenge is also coming up and writing the algorithms and understanding how they're searching for new things, whether or not that species does or does not exist in a database somewhere. Right. So we may have the hardware to be able to collect the data, but we need the algorithms and essentially the software to be able to identify things. That's on the invasive species side of things. But the other thing that I've heard a little bit about today is using data and this information to translate it back to citizens, whether they're local or around the globe. And data can be really powerful in helping tell those stories. Whether it's dealing with an emergency or an invasive species, or whether it's actually just highlighting the wonder and beauty of the oceans, of which most people don't have an opportunity to see. Now, of course, there's some places around the globe that is very high water clarity and beautiful, like the coral reef discussion we had before, but others, there's beauty in deeper, colder waters or areas that might be turbid. And we're getting better and better technology, high-resolution cameras to be able to detect where, in fact, we have life. And we're in the early stages of doing some of that in San Diego, whether it's looking at tracking eastern Pacific green sea turtles or seahorses, or looking at better understanding our native eelgrass population.
And mobilizing that public support is or that public interest is important, just more generally around conservation, to support conservation?
Absolutely imperative. And just maybe just to add a footnote to what Astasio was talking about in terms of the literacy, it's important to make sure that it's being uniform and it's being offered from young students, kindergarten, all the way through secondary education. So they have an idea and an exposure to the wonder of it. When you work at a port, you do take, you try not to take it for granted, but it's really important that you're sharing that with everybody else, because the more that people understand about it, then there can be momentum and movement to really have change that results in action, whether it's funding or policy or it's just one point on the regulation piece. Regulations absolutely have an opportunity, have a place, but when we're also trying to deploy emerging technologies that have environmental benefit, sometimes regulations do get in the way. So there needs to be a balance between supporting emerging market opportunities, that market opportunity versus regulation. Both are important, but there needs to be a balance.
Yeah. I want to come to the audience. Questions from the audience. I see two hands in the back, conveniently next to each other for the microphone person. And if we can get a microphone to these two gentlemen there, and then I see a couple other hands. Excellent. And a number of contributions from there. You need one of these?
Well, thank you all for this amazing panel. A lot of insights, a lot of experts there. Jason, you mentioned collaboration between the ports and kind of the role San Diego's leading. I mean, you guys are the only port currently here at this event. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this collaboration works in particular, especially in like competing markets, how regulations kind of like go in sometimes, making collaboration between the ports difficult?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So, from the blue economy standpoint, focusing on technology, the Port of San Diego, we started this journey about 10 years ago, and a lot of other in ports did at the same time. So just this past weekend, there was a Blue Economy Financing Forum, but as a part of a global network, there are a number of leading ports around the globe. We recently joined a group which was called the Port Innovators Network that was founded by 3 ports, 2 European ports and a Canadian port, Port of Valencia, Port of Hamburg, and Port of Halifax, called the Port Innovators Network. And the idea there is to create hubs around the world where we are sharing best practices, connecting essentially pipelines of companies that we're working with that are deploying and testing solutions at different locations that can be scalable and replicable and exported to other parts around the world. So there's organizations like that. We're also here participating in a number of World Economic Forum activities through 1000 Ocean Startups and connecting and identifying how ports can provide more access between both the public sector and the private sector. And so we're really leaning in. We have less of an international focus. Most of our focus is deploying products and services in California, but our mantra is if you can permit in California, you can probably permit it in almost anywhere in the world, which is why we're leaning in. And the great thing is at the port we have permitting expertise, scientists on staff, but we've got close relationships with industry, both regionally and internationally.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you for the session. This question could be picked up by any of the panel members, but perhaps most targeted at Jamie. It might be a bit of a tricky one, so I apologize in advance. But the title of the session is The Crucial Role of Technology to Restore Ocean Health. And I'm wondering what the flip side of that is. So what is better measured and mapped can be, in theory, better managed, but for good and for ill. And 6 weeks ago, we had the executive order from the American administration breaching customary international law by going ahead and pursuing a negotiation with the metals company to pursue deep sea mining. So in light of that, unintentionally, but perhaps consequently, would not the Seabed Initiative, the 2030 program that you're managing, inadvertently support with the, newly extractable economic global commons that until now has been protected? Thank you.
Good question. Okay, I'll sort of try and rewind to one of the comments I made earlier about levelling the playing field. So if you are a national economy the size of the one you just described, or if you are an industry player that's got huge investment, you can get on and map the ocean to your heart's content at high resolution, suitable for your own purposes, which then leaves the other communities who haven't got those resources without an adequate map. So going back to what I said about levelling the playing field, I mean, at the end of the day, the reason we haven't mapped the ocean is physics. You know, Mother Nature did not intend us to be able to look through the ocean with our eyes. So we've adequately mapped the land masses of the world. The ocean is a bit missing. 3/4 of it we haven't mapped. Therefore, 3/4 of it we don't really know what's down there. You know, what seamounts exist, what rich biodiversity is down there. So if we stand half a chance of being able to protect that and sustainably manage the ocean, we need that adequate map, and we need that map to be freely available to everybody.
Other comments or questions? Yes, here up front. We'll take a few up front. Did you have a question too? So first, right here with the glasses. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this panel. So coming from the conservation sector, there is this idea always of the need of demonstrating the benefits of our conservation actions, restoration actions that are leading ecosystem to build up ocean health. So my question was about the role of these technologies from your point of view in that demonstration of the benefits, and particularly talking about carbon sequestration, for example, that is difficult for us, that we see it as a gray area. So I don't know if you, coming from other sectors, could share with us some kind of successful stories about assessing those habitats that in theory we are needing that science to support more decision making. Thank you.
I can specifically speak to the carbon sequestration. We just built 2 of our vehicles for monitoring, reporting, and verification for carbon sequestration. So these vehicles are built with sensors integrated exactly for that application. So ensuring that we can determine if the carbon is permanently sequestered, but also ensuring that it has no negative impact on the ocean. And I think this is very important as we look at advancing new technologies such as those for carbon sequestration. I mean, the oceans have the potential, they already are one of our biggest sequesters of CO2, but they have the potential to do so much more. But we need to do that wisely, and we need to have the information. And modeling is valuable, but we need to get those measurements from the ocean to make sure that we're doing it properly. And I think really one of the only ways to do that is to employ technology like uncrewed systems, because it's too expensive to put boats out there, and there's sustainability issues with the use of fuel and carbon dioxide emissions. But if you can put renewably powered vehicles out there that can adequately collect that data and say that it is safe and say that that carbon dioxide is being sequestered, it can lead to a lot of benefits, not only carbon sequestration, but possibly carbon credits to support some of those countries that might want to be able to do that, and then they have capital to protect their oceans as well.
Jason?
Just really briefly, just following up what Julie was talking about. So in the Port of San Diego, we're in our 3rd year of collecting data connected to our climate action platforms. We have mitigation, emissions reduction, adaptation, but sequestration. We're in the 3rd year of collecting data related to eelgrass beds, and a lot of times when people think about carbon sequestration, they think about the oceans themselves, or they think about tropical rainforests, but there's a massive amount of sediment, of sequestration potential in the sediment. And so we've been analyzing in the last 3 years the opportunity for sediment to store carbon in the ocean related to eelgrass beds. And like Julie said, if we can look at a multiplier factor that not only protects it from a biological standpoint, but also provides some carbon credit or nature credit benefit, that really will, I think, open up doors, and we need to start thinking about things multidimensionally from a credit standpoint and not singly.
Time's running low. I did point to you. Are you happy? Do you want to ask a question briefly? If you could pass it there, and then I see the gentleman there, and then we'll take both, and then we'll come to the panel for final.
Thank you again for another session. I think I've killed 2 phones trying to take notes today, so I don't know how you're still going. This is really a question for Jamie. And I'm Georgina from Burgess Yachts. We know you through one of your brilliant partners, Seakeepers, and we're talking to them about how we get the machinery onto all the boats. I guess the question is, we know little about the ocean, but we know a lot about global shipping movements already. We have the AIS data. So given how many boats are constantly moving around, if you could get what I understand is a very small and very simple piece of tech on even a sensible number of boats, how much of the work that you need to get done could be done if people just said, yes?
Good question. Okay, the gentleman there, I did, yep, let's keep going right in the middle. Yes. Nope, you just passed him. Thank you.
Thank you. This follows up on the question about carbon removal and sequestration. The other, perhaps most threat to the health of the ocean is the enormous amount of heat that we're driving in on a daily basis, an annual basis, the energy imbalance, which has actually doubled in the last 20 years, unbeknownst to our climate models and unmeasured by them, and we can't quite explain it. So most of this heat's going into the ocean, and if you accept that that's driving some of the most dangerous change to the ocean, and will continue to do so until we change that equation, what are some technologies that are on your radar that might be able to deal with the heat going into the ocean?
Great question. So I don't know if you can address those, but also any final takeaways that you want to the audience. Julie, can I come to you first?
Sure. I think I'm better suited to address your question. So the oceans are heating up because our greenhouse gas emissions are rising. So we need to curb emissions and we need to sequester CO2 from the atmosphere. So if we can do more on both fronts and the oceans are poised to do more to sequester CO2, then that will reduce the heating of the oceans. So I think that's crucial. The health of our planet and the health of our planet depends on our oceans, so we have to do that. And so for me, as a parting statement, I would say that technology really does have a very powerful role to play in restoring ocean health. We already have a lot of this technology that exists, and so it's up to us to invest in it and to deploy it wisely in the ocean so that we get the outcomes that we need to ensure that the ocean not only continues to provide for our planet, but it provides for future generations.
Sebastian, maybe the point about the technology on ships.
The technology on ships, I don't know to give the answer.
Okay.
Maybe you have a better answer about because.
But please, your final takeaway.
Okay. I will talk about the importance of these technologies for marine biodiversity because as of today, we have discovered 250,000 marine species. The science say that the number is 10 times higher. So we talk about a huge number. This may be the solution. But we will access it because we don't know the organic that live there. So they help us to know better what's down there to the ocean. Even recently, we learned about hydrothermal vents. So there is even light down extreme depths after 6,000 meters that we didn't know was existed. So we have to identify the species with the help of these technologies to restore the ocean health.
Thank you. Jason?
Maybe just a final word. I'll say collaboration, data, science, action, they all have to be collectively and spontaneously kind of happening at the same time. This space is messy, but it requires a lot of work and participation. I'll just close things the way I did at the beginning, which is I think we can take a leaf out of nature's playbook, and I do think where we can advance technology to restore ocean health is looking at those opportunities, whether it be biomimicry or elsewhere.
Jimmy?
I'm going to answer the question. Okay. Because it's in my area. So the world's major shipping tends to move along well-mapped routes because it needs to, within that regulatory framework, the major ports are all incredibly well-mapped, well-surveyed. It's the bits in between. So actually, we are hugely reliant on the research community and the yachting community, be that small pleasure craft to large super yachts, to fill the bits in between, because there are parts of the ocean that some of those that large traffic will never cover. So if you have a vessel, you want a data logger, get in touch with our colleagues at Seakeepers, and every depth value helps.
Yeah, everyone can play a role in this, but I think it really does seem, I think, Julie, you said you were on the cusp, but it obviously does feel like we are obviously more generally in the midst of a pretty exciting, some might say terrifying acceleration of technological innovation. And clearly that's also happening in the ocean space. And I think the potential to benefit from that is pretty exciting, even though the regulatory challenges are also pretty daunting as well. But thank you very much to my panel of speakers. Thank you to the audience.